The night was cruel. The wind screamed across the frozen land like a monster. Snow danced in the air, sharp as knives. Every step on the white ground made a crack, as if the earth itself wanted to swallow him whole. The human moved slowly. His coat was thick, but the cold still cut through his bones. He had traveled many places, but this world was different. This was not just winter. This was death made of ice. His breath turned into clouds. The stars above were pale, hidden by the storm. He wondered why he had chosen this path. But there was no turning back. The mission was clear. Cross the frozen valley before dawn. Then, through the howl of the storm, he heard something. It was not the wind, not the cracking of ice. It was softer, weaker, like a cry. The human stopped. His heart beat louder than the storm. He listened again. Yes, it was a cry, a voice too small to belong to any soldier, too fragile to belong to a beast. He turned his head toward the sound. There, near a pile of frozen rocks, a faint glow pulsed under the snow. At first he thought it was a piece of broken tech, but as he stepped closer, he realized it was something else. He knelt, pushing away the icy layers, and then he froze. It was a child, an alien child. Her skin was pale blue, almost crystal under the frost. Her tiny body trembled. Her lips moved, but no words came out, only a weak breath. The human stared at her. Every law, every rule of survival told him to walk away. This was not his problem. She was not his kind. He had barely enough supplies for himself. Saving her meant risking his own life. But her eyes, her glowing alien eyes, opened slowly, and they looked at him. Not with anger, not with fear, but with a silent plea, a question without words. Will you leave me to die? The human swallowed hard. The storm grew worse. Snow slammed against his back like fists. His body ached from the cold. Yet his hands moved on their own. He pulled the child from the snow. Her body was light, fragile, too light, as if life was already slipping away. She shivered violently. Her small fingers tried to grip his coat. Her mouth opened and closed. She spoke in a language he could not understand, but her voice cracked like breaking glass. The meaning was clear. She was begging. The human felt something burn inside his chest. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was something stronger, the refusal to let innocence die. He wrapped her in his arms, shielding her from the storm. For a moment he thought of turning back. The ship was far behind. He could place her there. Maybe she would survive. But then he remembered. No one was left at the ship. No one would take care of her. If he left her, she was finished. The human sighed. His body was tired, his supplies low, his path already deadly. But now he carried more than his own life. Now he carried hope. A hope so small it could fit in his arms. The child's breathing grew weaker. Her skin was ice against his chest. He tightened his hold. His eyes narrowed against the wind. I will not let you die, he whispered. Though she could not understand the words, the promise was there, a human promise, unshakable. He turned toward the dark horizon. The storm roared louder. The snow swallowed his footsteps. The world seemed endless. But in his arms, a fragile heartbeat fought against death. And he knew, this night was no longer about his mission. It was about her, the frozen child who needed him, the alien who now carried his fate. He walked forward into the storm, every step heavier than the last, every breath harder to take. But he did not stop. He would not stop. Because sometimes humanity is not measured in strength, not in weapons, not in power, but in the choice to kneel in the snow, to lift the helpless, and to walk to the frozen night, refusing to let life be stolen by the cold. And so the human walked on, carrying the child, carrying a bond he did not yet understand, but one that would change everything forever. The storm still raged, snow whipped across the man's face, but he did not let go of the small body in his arms. He pushed forward step by step. The weight was not heavy, yet it felt heavier than anything he had ever carried before. The child shivered, her tiny breath shallow and broken, her skin like glass touched by frost. He feared each second that her chest would stop moving, that she would slip away before dawn. Then, slowly, her eyes opened. Two glowing orbs, not human eyes, yet filled with life. Her gaze locked onto his face, weak but sharp, as if searching for an answer. The man froze. For a moment, he forgot the storm. He forgot the danger. Those eyes pierced through him, full of questions, full of fear, full of a silent demand. Why had he lifted her? Why had he not left her behind, like everyone else had? Her lips moved. A whisper escaped. Strange words, broken sounds, A language not his own, he could not understand, yet he felt the meaning. She was speaking to him, begging, or maybe thanking. He did not know, but he knew one thing. She wanted to live. The human's heart tightened. He adjusted his coat around her small body, the warmth of his chest against her icy skin. Her fingers weakly clutched the fabric. She held on, as if letting go meant falling into death. He lowered his head. "You'll be all right," he whispered, even though she could not understand, but her eyes softened, as if his tone alone gave her strength. The storm grew louder. The ground shook under the roar of distant ice cracking. The man searched desperately for shelter. His supplies would not last, and the child's life was slipping away too fast. He spotted a narrow cave ahead, dark, carved into the icy rocks. It was risky. There could be creatures inside, but outside the storm promised death. He made his choice. Inside, the cave was cold. But shielded from the screaming wind, he set the child down gently against the stone. She winced, her eyes half closing. He quickly lit a small flame from his gear. The orange glow painted her face. For the first time he could see her clearly. Her skin was thin and glowing faintly, her cheeks marked with faint patterns like frost flowers, her hair white as the snow outside. But her eyes were alive, deep, strange, and filled with something he could not name. She looked at him again, and this time her voice came softer. She spoke slowly, trying to form words. Her throat was weak, but one sound was clear. She whispered, "Why?" The man froze. He understood that word, or maybe his heart understood. Why did he save her? Why risk his life? Why carry a child that was not his own, a stranger from another world, something everyone else had thrown away? He opened his mouth, but no answer came. The truth was simple. He had seen her eyes, and in those eyes, he saw life. He saw the one thing no storm could bury: hope. The child closed her eyes again, exhausted, but her tiny hand reached out. It rested weakly on his wrist, her touch fragile, like a leaf about to break in the wind. But it was enough. It was trust. The human sat beside her, feeding the fire, listening to the storm outside. He knew danger was still near. This world was not kind, and he had just made enemies without knowing it. Who had abandoned this child? And why? The questions bit at his mind like the cold. Yet as he watched her chest rise and fall, he felt a strange strength inside. He had chosen. He had crossed a line. He was no longer just a traveler on this frozen world. He was her shield now, her protector. The cave shook with the wind, but inside the small fire burned. The girl's eyes opened one more time, and though her lips trembled, though she spoke in a broken tongue, her voice carried meaning, soft, fragile, but clear. "Don't leave." The man swallowed hard, his jaw tightened. He leaned closer and whispered, "I won't." The storm could rage, the world could freeze, but he would not abandon her, not while she still had breath, not while her eyes still shone with the will to live. And so, in the heart of the frozen night, two lives bound together, a human who could not walk away, and an alien child who refused to die. Their journey had only just begun, but already, the ice outside seemed weaker, because in the warmth of that cave, something powerful was born, a bond that would outlast the storm. The fire inside the cave burned low, shadows danced along the frozen walls. The human sat close, watching the child breathe. Her chest rose and fell, weak but steady. For now, she was safe. But outside, the storm still screamed, and with the wind came something else, a sound he did not expect, not the howl of nature, but the heavy crunch of footsteps in the snow. The man froze. His heart quickened. Slowly he pressed his hand against the cave wall, listening. The steps were too steady, too organized. They were not lost travelers. They were searching. The child stirred. Her glowing eyes opened halfway. She whispered something in her language, her tone sharp, urgent. Her body trembled. She knew that sound. She feared it. The human placed a finger against his lips. "Quiet," he whispered. Though she might not understand the word, the meaning was clear. She bit her lip and clung to his arm, her tiny fingers shaking. He dimmed the fire quickly. Shadows swallowed them again. The cave became colder. The only warmth was her fragile body pressed against him. He crouched low, eyes fixed on the cave entrance. Through the storm he saw them. Dark shapes moving like hunters on the snow. Tall figures with glowing armor. Their eyes red beneath metal masks. Weapons in their hands. Humming with energy. They moved in a line, scanning the ground, looking for something or someone. The human's breath slowed. These were not allies, they were predators, and the child was their prey. One of the hunters stopped. He knelt near the rocks outside the cave. He ran his claws over the snow, then lifted something. A fragment of cloth, small and blue, the child's torn clothing. The hunter growled, a guttural sound that echoed across the storm. The others gathered, their voices low but angry. The human did not need translation. They had her scent. They knew she was close. The child whimpered. Tears formed in her glowing eyes. She buried her face against his chest. The human felt her fear like fire in his veins. These hunters, were they the ones who abandoned her? Or were they sent to finish what others had started? The man's jaw tightened. He gripped the small knife on his belt. It was nothing against their weapons, but he would not surrender her. He would fight, even if it meant his death. The hunters spread out. One moved dangerously close to the cave entrance. Snow crunched under his heavy boots. The human pressed himself against the wall, holding the child tight. Her small breaths trembled against his chest. The hunter paused, sniffed the air, then turned his head toward the cave. The human's heart pounded. If the hunter stepped one more pace, they would be seen, exposed, trapped like prey. The man's grip on his knife tightened. His mind raced. Could he strike first? Could he distract them long enough for the child to escape? No, she was too weak. She could not run. There was no choice but to stand. The hunter stepped forward. The storm howled louder behind him. The cave trembled with the weight of danger. The child clutched the man's coat. Her lips moved, and in broken human tongue, she whispered one word. Hide. The human blinked. She had learned this word, and she used it now. Her voice carried fear, but also trust. She trusted him to protect her, to keep her hidden. The man slid deeper into the shadows of the cave. He pulled her close under his coat. He slowed his breathing until it was almost silent. The hunter's glowing eyes scanned the darkness. The cave seemed empty, only rock and shadow. After a long moment, the hunter growled and turned away. The human did not relax. He knew they would not stop. They would keep searching until they found her. The hunters regrouped outside. Their leader raised his weapon, pointing toward the cliffs beyond the cave. They moved, leaving tracks in the snow. Their voices faded into the storm, but the human knew this was not the end. They would circle back. They would search every corner of the frozen land, and when they returned, he and the child had to be far from here. The child lifted her head weakly. Her eyes met his. They were full of tears, but also something stronger. A spark of hope. She had seen him choose silence over surrender, strength over fear. And though she was small and broken, her eyes told him she believed in him. The man sighed. He looked out at the storm, the hunter's shadows fading in the distance. He whispered to himself, "This is no longer survival. This is war." He packed his gear quickly, wrapped the child tighter in his coat, and stepped back into the deadly snow. The storm clawed at him, but he no longer walked for himself. He walked for her, for the child whose eyes had asked him not to leave, and for the promise he could not break. Far away, the hunters howled, their voices rising through the frozen night. The hunt had only begun, and the human knew. Next time, there would be no shadows deep enough to hide them. The storm raged through the endless white. The human pushed forward, step after step. His boots sank into the deep snow. Every breath burned in his chest, but he did not stop, because in his arms lay the child. Her body weak, her eyes half closed, her small frame shaking under the weight of the cold. He scanned the horizon, searching for anything. A shadow, a ruin, a place to hide. The hunters were still out there, their cries echoing faintly in the distance. He knew they would not give up. They were closing in, step by step, and soon the storm would no longer hide him. Then, through the blinding snow, he saw it, the broken shape of a building, half buried in ice, metal walls twisted, a roof shattered by centuries of storms. It looked fragile, it looked unsafe, but it was shelter, and right now, shelter meant life. He hurried forward. The door was gone. Only jagged metal remained. He pushed through, the sound of his boots echoing inside the ruin. The wind was weaker here. The snow did not bite as hard, but the silence was unsettling. He set the child down gently, on what remained of the floor. The room was cold, the air thick with frost. But at least they were hidden from the storm. He quickly pulled out his kit, lit a fire in the corner. The flames flickered weakly, barely strong enough to fight the chill. The child's glowing eyes opened. She looked around, her lips parted, her voice fragile. "This home?" she whispered. Her words were broken, but the human understood the meaning. This was no home. This was ruin. But for now, it was the only place they had. He sat beside her, wrapped his coat tighter around her shoulders. She leaned against him, her small hand clutching his sleeve. He could feel the trust in her touch, the way she held on, as if he was the only solid thing left in her world. But then, a sound broke the silence. A sharp crack. The walls of the shelter groaned. Snow and ice slid down from above. The roof shuddered. The whole structure trembled like it would collapse. The human's eyes darted upward. He cursed under his breath. This place would not hold. It was breaking. Every gust of wind pushed the walls harder. Every shake of the ground brought new cracks. The fire hissed as flakes of ice fell upon it. The child's eyes widened. She clung to him. "Safe?" she asked softly. Her voice was trembling, her body shaking. She looked at him with pure fear, like she had seen this before, a shelter that promised safety, only to betray her. The human's jaw tightened. He pulled her close. His eyes scanned the broken beams. They had to move soon. But outside, the hunters' voices grew closer. He could hear faint echoes through the storm, a howl, a call. They were circling. They were hunting. His heart pounded, trapped between two dangers. The collapsing shelter behind him, the hunters ahead. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed on his chest. The storm, the cold, the child in his arms. It was too much. But then, he looked at her eyes, glowing faintly in the firelight, full of terror, yet full of belief. She believed he would not leave her. She believed he could save her, and that belief gave him strength. He rose to his feet, the child still in his arms. The roof groaned above them. Shards of ice fell around them. The fire sputtered and died. Darkness swallowed the room. The child buried her face in his chest, her small voice whispering again, "Don't leave." The same plea she had spoken in the cave, the same plea that had bound his heart to hers. "I won't," he whispered back, his voice low but steady. Even if the world fell apart around him, he would not break that promise. The walls cracked louder. Snow burst through a broken panel. The hunter's shadows flickered beyond the storm. He had seconds to choose. Stay and die in a collapsing ruin, or step outside into the teeth of the enemy. He shifted the child higher in his arms. His eyes narrowed, his body trembling with cold and exhaustion, but his will like iron. "If they want you," he muttered, "they'll have to go through me." The roof gave another terrible groan. The hunters' voices rose like thunder, and in that shattered shelter, the human stood tall. A fragile flame against two storms, the storm of nature and the storm of enemies. For one heartbeat, time stood still. Then the wall split open, snow blasted in, the shelter cracked like glass, and the battle for survival truly began. The walls of the ruined shelter groaned, shards of ice rained down from above. The storm outside screamed like a wild beast, and through it all, the human held the child close, her small body trembling, her glowing eyes wide with fear. He moved quickly, dodging falling beams, kicking away broken panels. The fire was dead now. Only cold darkness remained, but his arms were steady, his heart fierce. He would not let her be crushed. The roof cracked louder, snow poured through the gaps. The child whimpered, her lips moved in her broken voice. "Please, safe." Her words were soft, but they carried more weight than the storm itself. The human pressed her tighter against his chest. "I've got you," he whispered, even though she might not understand. But her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw trust, a fragile spark glowing in her tears. With one final push, he broke through a side wall. The icy air blasted his face. He stumbled into the storm again. Snow clawed at his coat. Wind howled in his ears. But he was free of the collapsing ruin. Behind him, the shelter fell. The sound was deafening, metal and ice crashing into the ground. The place that once gave hope now destroyed. Dust and frost swirled into the air. But he did not look back. He had no reason to. The only thing that mattered was still alive in his arms. He staggered forward. The child's eyes blinked slowly, her small fingers clutching his sleeve, her lips parted. She spoke again in her broken mix of words. "You stay?" The human swallowed. Her voice shook like glass, but inside it was a whisper of trust. She was asking him, not about this moment, but about every moment that would follow. Would he stay? Would he fight for her when no one else did? He stopped, looked down at her, snow clinging to her pale hair, her cheeks red from the cold. Her body weak, yet her eyes searching his, trusting him, waiting for his answer. He lowered his head, his lips close to her ear. "I'll stay," he whispered, slow, firm, I won't leave you, ever." The child's small chest rose with a shiver. Her eyes closed for a moment, and a tiny sigh escaped her lips. It was not fear this time. It was relief. She believed him. She trusted him. And in that trust, something powerful was born, but the storm did not allow rest. The hunters' voices carried through the blizzard, closer now, sharp guttural sounds. The hunt was not over. They were still being tracked. The human clenched his jaw. He looked at the white horizon. No path was safe, but he had no choice. He had given his word, and his word was iron. He would not fail her. He trudged forward, each step heavy, each breath like fire in his lungs. The child leaned against him, her head against his chest, her glowing eyes half closed, but her trust kept her alive, her belief stronger than the cold. Hours passed like years. The storm never calmed. His body screamed for rest, but he carried her, through snow that tried to bury them both, through winds that tried to tear her from his arms. He carried her, because she had no one else. Finally, he spotted another ruin, smaller, half-hidden in the ice. A broken outpost, walls torn but still standing. It was no fortress, but it was enough. For now, he pushed inside. The silence was heavy, but at least the wind could not reach them. He set her down carefully against a wall, her breath shallow, her skin still cold, but her eyes lifted toward him again, this time softer, gentler. Her lips moved, struggling to shape the words. "You promise?" The man knelt, placed his hand gently on her small shoulder. "Yes," he said, steady and firm. "I promise." The child's eyes glowed faintly. She leaned her head against his arm, and for the first time since he found her, a tiny smile touched her lips. The human sat beside her, exhausted, but stronger than he had ever been, because now he carried more than her life. He carried her trust, and he would not break it. Outside, the storm raged, the hunters prowled. But inside that broken outpost, two souls sat side by side, a fragile flame of hope burning in the dark. And though danger was everywhere, the child whispered again, this time softer, this time full of belief. "Safe, with you." The human closed his eyes, a single tear freezing on his cheek, and he whispered back, "Yes, always." The storm could howl, the hunters could chase, but trust had been born in the frozen night, and that trust would not be broken. Not by the cold, not by death, not by anything. The ruined outpost groaned under the weight of the storm. Cold air seeped through every crack, but inside, two figures sat close. A human, weary yet unbroken, and a small alien child, wrapped in his coat, her eyes half closed, but her trust unshaken. The silence was heavy, the kind of silence that comes before danger. The man could feel it in his bones. He knew the hunters were close, too close. He stood slowly, his boots silent on the frost-covered floor. He scanned the shadows, listened to the howling wind outside, and then he heard it. A low, rumbling growl, not from the storm, but from beyond it. Voices deep and sharp. The hunters had arrived. The child stirred. Her glowing eyes blinked open. She looked up at him, fear flickering across her small face. Her lips moved. "They come?" she whispered. The human nodded. "Yes," he said quietly. "They're here." She trembled, her small hands clutching his sleeve, but she didn't cry. She didn't scream, because she trusted him, and that trust was her strength. He crouched beside her, placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "I'll keep you safe," he said, his voice steady, even as the walls shook with the approach of danger. Then, the first blast hit. The outpost shuddered. Snow and ice fell from the ceiling. The door exploded inward. And three hunters stepped through, their armor black and glowing, their eyes red with fury, weapons raised, their growls filling the air like thunder. The human pushed the child behind him. His body tensed, his heart pounded like a drum. He had no armor, no weapon strong enough to match theirs, but he had something they didn't, a reason to fight. The hunters stepped forward. Their leader growled in a language the human couldn't understand, but he understood the tone. It was a command, a demand. Give up the child. The human shook his head. He stood tall, his eyes burning like fire. "No," he said, his voice cold and fierce. "You can't have her." The hunters roared, their weapons glowed, and the fight began. The human moved fast, dodging the first blast. The wall behind him exploded. Snow and fire filled the air. He lunged forward, striking the nearest hunter with all his strength. His blade cut deep. Sparks flew. The hunter howled in pain, but the others attacked. One slammed into him. He fell hard against the floor. Pain shot through his body. But he didn't stop. He rolled, grabbed a broken pipe, and swung with all his strength. Metal clashed with armor. The hunter stumbled. The human kicked him back, then turned to the child. She was huddled in the corner, tears in her glowing eyes. But she didn't run. She didn't hide. She whispered, "Fight, please." And he did. He fought with every breath, every muscle, every heartbeat, because her voice gave him strength, because her trust lit a fire in his soul. He fought like the storm, fierce and unstoppable. One hunter fell, then another, but the leader remained, towering, furious, his weapon glowing like a small sun. The human stood bleeding, his breath ragged, but he didn't back down. He stepped forward, eyes locked on the enemy, and whispered, "She's mine to protect." The hunter roared, charged forward, their weapon. Ends clashed, sparks and snow flew around them. The outpost shook with the force of their fight. The child watched, her small hands clenched in fear, but also in hope. Then, with a final strike, the human drove his blade deep into the hunter's chest. The enemy roared in pain, staggered, and fell, crashing into the wall, silent. The battle was over, but the storm still raged. The human stood panting, his body bruised and bleeding, but his eyes burned with victory. He turned to the child. She stared at him, her glowing eyes wide. Then she stood, wobbled on her small legs, and stepped forward. She reached up with her tiny hand, touched his face, and whispered, "You, safe. Me, safe." He knelt, pulled her into his arms, held her tight, and whispered back, "Yes, you're safe now." The outpost was broken, the air was cold, the storm still howled, but inside that ruined room, a bond had been forged in fire, a bond that could not be broken, not by ice, not by war, not by death, because when trust becomes fire, even the coldest world can burn with hope. The storm finally began to fade. Its howling cries softened into whispers. The snow still fell, but the world no longer shook with fury. Dawn was coming. A pale light stretched across the horizon, turning the ice from black to silver. Inside the ruined outpost, the human sat slumped against the wall, blood staining his sleeve, his body heavy with pain, but his arms still held the child, alive, breathing, safe. She stirred softly, her glowing eyes opening. She blinked at him, her lips parted in a weak voice. "You not leave?" The human smiled faintly, exhausted but steady. "No," he whispered. "I told you, I'll never leave." Her small hand lifted, touched his chest gently. She felt the strong beat of his heart, and her eyes softened. A warmth glowed in them, a light that no storm could ever break. The world outside grew brig. Ere the first rays of dawn touched the frozen land, the hunters were gone, defeated or scattered, but their threat would not vanish forever. The human knew this, yet for now, they had survived. The child shifted closer, resting her head against him, her voice fragile, but filled with a strange certainty. "You've family now." The words hit him harder than the cold. He blinked, looked down at her, her face pale but peaceful, her trust pure. Family, that was what he had become to her. Not rescuer, not protector, but family. He tightened his arms around her, a lump in his throat. He had lost much in his life, seen too many broken places, but this small voice, this small being, had given him something he didn't know he needed: belonging. They sat in silence as the dawn grew. The snow reflected the rising light, turning the world into a sea of silver and gold. The child watched the horizon, her lips forming a soft smile. For the first time, she was not afraid of tomorrow. The human rose slowly, his body aching but strong. He lifted her in his arms again. She curled against him, trusting completely. He stepped out of the ruins, into the light of the new day. The land stretched before them, endless ice, but no longer endless despair. Because now they were two, not alone, not abandoned, together, as they walked. The child whispered something in her language, her words soft like a song. The human did not understand, but he understood her tone. It was hope. It was belonging. It was life. He looked at her glowing eyes, then at the rising sun, and for the first time in years, he felt peace. The storm might return, the hunters might chase, the world might try to take her again. But he had made a promise, and promises were stronger than steel. "I'll protect you," he whispered again, even though she was drifting into sleep. Her small lips curved into a smile. She had heard him, and she believed. The human walked on, every step carving a path into the snow, a path not just for survival, but for something greater, a bond that crossed worlds, a truth that echoed louder than the storm, that humanity was not weakness, not fragility, but the will to fight, to protect, to love. At last the sun rose fully, the ice blazed with golden fire, the child opened her eyes once more. She looked at him, her voice faint but clear. You, mine, always. The human's chest tightened, he nodded slowly. Yes, he said, always. And so, in the frozen world where death hunted the weak, where storms tore apart the sky, and where hope was buried under snow, two figures walked into the dawn, a human and an alien child, bound by trust, bound by promise, bound by love stronger than the cold. They had survived the night, they had survived the hunters, and now, in the light of a new day, they had found something greater than survival. They had found belonging.